Hi, I'm Alex McGregor, a board member of La Crosse Community Pride, a member of the Ice Age Floods Institute, and an enthusiastic supporter of the Whitman County Libraries. In the far northwest of the United States, says historical geographer Donald Meinig, whose roots are here, lies an unusual land. So sharply is it set apart from its surroundings that it can be recognized immediately at a mere glance. Approached from any direction, the visible change at its borders is striking. The forest thins, then abruptly ends. The mountains lower, then merge into a much smoother surface. And a different kind of country, open and undulating, rolls out before the viewer like a great interior sea. Yet here in La Crosse and western Whitman County, adjacent Adams and Franklin counties and beyond, the forces of nature worked on a scale matched nowhere else in the world, leaving a land rugged, wild, and a remarkable place to visit or to put down roots. Rugged canyons of basalt everywhere untamed and little changed since Meriwether Lewis and William Clark visited in 1805. Lava flows formed layer after layer of basalt miles deep in places, from openings as far north as modern St. John in the Palouse, as far south as the Grand Ronde in eastern Oregon. The lava covered all but a few remnants of a mountain range, Steptoe and Kamiak Buttes among them, and flowed all the way to the Pacific Ocean, where its edges can be viewed today at Haystack Rock and other pinnacles along the Oregon coast. A story of volcanism and fire on a massive scale. A land later covered with soils with remarkable water-holding capacity and productivity. Wind-blown remnants of runoff from glacial lake beds left from ice ages of eons past. Yet canyons braided across these fertile hills where topsoil has been scoured away in rugged features, we locals call them coulees, incised into the basaltic flows. What happened?
As far as Ice Age floods go, it's a unique story, it's a unique land. This landscape you don't see anywhere else on this planet. If you want to see anything similar to it, you have to go to Mars. And you talk about the volume of water, and you talk about all this, the explorative you always hear is, wow.
A feisty and determined geologist, J. Harlan Bretz, a century ago became intrigued by the land and studied it all very carefully, taking on skeptics in his field with accounts of something catastrophic. I could conceive of no geologic process of erosion, he remembered, to make this topography, except huge, violent rivers of glacial meltwater. It was a debacle which swept across the Columbia Plateau. It was that, indeed. Massive onslaughts of floodwaters from glacial Lake Missoula, the largest, more than 10 times the volume of all the rivers in the world today. The lake, held by a massive ice dam near the mouth of the Clark Fork River and modern-day Lake Pend Oreille, was 2,000 feet deep in places and contained a volume of water equal to that of two modern Great Lakes, Ontario and Erie. 500 cubic miles of water drained in 48 hours when the dam failed, moving at speeds of up to 80 miles an hour. A family of panicked mammoths attempted to flee the rising floodwaters. There was no escape. The waters were 300 feet high, and the bones of some of those big animals remain. The floods decimated the land time and time again as ice flows refilled the canyons of Idaho and Montana some 15,000 years ago. Field geologists estimate as many as 81 floods in all, the earliest ones tending to be the largest. The town of La Crosse is at the edge of the rolling hills of the Palouse, near the easternmost channel of ancient floodwaters, the Cheney-Palouse Tract. As with everything associated with catastrophic floods, there is nothing puny about this channel. It's as wide as 25 miles in places, with many an arid coulee and one spectacular river canyon nearby, with 3 upper cataracts within its bounds. The Palouse breaks into 4 channels at Gildersleeve Falls, named for a pioneer cattle-raising family living nearby. The cement breastworks remain of the Washtenaw Power and Light Company. Pioneer local resident Sherman McGregor remembered that during hot summers, when the water flow was low, there was just enough power produced to make the lights a dull orange. Paul Kane, an artist who traveled with explorers, described the land in the canyon as a curious and strange region that assumed a new aspect of increased wildness and magnificence at every turn. Before the floods, the rugged canyons described by Kane did not exist. With each deluge, fractures in the basalt were cut deeper and deeper until the Palouse left its former valley, from modern-day Washtuna, Colodus, Connell, and Pasco, shortening its old route 50 miles. At Little Falls, the new channel began, a sheer canyon as deep as 400 feet, heading due south to the Snake River. So massive was the flood that the Snake backed up all the way to modern-day Lewiston, leaving high mounds of gravel and sand all along the way. Were Native Americans here to witness the cataclysms that created the rugged Palouse River Canyon and left an imprint on this land? Quite possibly, even likely, though we do not know for certain. There are many legends among inland Northwest Indian tribes of massive floods. Sam Fisher, one of the last Palouse Indians to live along the river canyon and a longtime family friend, shared with my ancestors a story that explains every feature on the river and its tributaries. Sam Spring on the Whitman County side of the river is named for him. Here's the start of a much abbreviated version. 4 giant brothers and their giant sister took pride in keeping their hair shiny and decided to get more oil to keep their locks fashionable by attacking the huge big beaver that lived nearby to get oil from his tail. They dealt Beaver a glancing blow at Gildersleeve, and the huge animal slapped his tail 4 times to warn them, creating the 4 separate falls. At Little Falls, he was injured by a spear and turned sharply south to get away. The 3rd cataract marks a spot where Big Beaver took a quick turn after digging a straight channel for several miles. It's Helen's Falls, honoring Helen Fisher, wife of Sam. Here, if you look closely, you can find burned wood and lignite created when one of the lava flows entered a forest. A road laborer who helped build the Mullen Road from 1859 to 1862, John Strahan, said of the canyon on the Whitman County side of Palouse Falls, "Here are some of the most beautiful flowers that could be imagined, every tint of color and beauty of form. My favorites are the ruffled blue flowers of the Brodia douglasii, named for a pioneer western botanist, also called a wild hyacinth, with hillsides of bright yellow balsam root sunflowers a close second, though everyone has their own. It was and is a land of coyotes, jackrabbits, marmots, rattlesnakes, badgers, burrowing owls, long-beaked curlews, giant blue herons, and an assortment of hawks alert for any sign of activity on the broad prairies. Seldom seen but footprints found, bobcats and cougars in the base of the canyon. In numbers much greater than pioneer days on the prairies above, deer and elk. At what would become the Big Falls, Big Beaver fought valiantly and tore out a huge canyon. His claw marks, crevices that are vertical cracks in the basalt cliffs, are visible today. Big Beaver escaped after the big fight. Perhaps he would have been free if it had not been for Coyote, who was watching on the south side of the river. When he saw Beaver escaping, Coyote stood with 1 foot in the short grass and 1 foot in the long grass and sang his power song. His power song made Beaver turn round and go back up the Snake to the mouth of the Palouse. There the 4 giant brothers speared him and killed him. You can see Beaver's heart today, the big round rock on the west side of the Palouse River where it joins the Snake. Reduced in scale by dynamite to let steamboats pass in pioneer days, his heart was named Palouse, after which the adjacent village and the region was named. Meriwether Lewis and William Clark visited Palouse in 1805, where as many as 50 mat-covered lodges were occupied seasonally during fishing season. They presented a peace medal bearing the image of President Jefferson to one of the Palouse chiefs, a medal found by archaeologists at the site 160 years later. The Palouse were well known for their fine beadwork, basketry, and moccasins. Sam Fisher gave his gloves and pouches to my ancestors in appreciation for their assistance in helping him keep the land where his family had lived for many generations. An outstanding horseman and horse breeder, many credit Sam for being crucial in saving the Appaloosa horse breed that had its origins here. Growing up in the Ice Age flood channels, we knew of riverside caves with ancient Indian artifacts and alerted Dick Doherty, an archaeologist at Washington State. My family provided food and lodging at our ranch boarding house, the Hooper Hotel, for the archaeology team, and I tagged along as the youngest person with a trowel. With the reservoir of the newly built Lower Monumental Dam ever rising, Congress, the President, and an array of agencies worked to build a cofferdam to protect the site where the remains of Marmas Man, one of the oldest in the Western Hemisphere, at 11,500 years of age, were found. The water seeped in despite the frantic efforts. An interesting area to visit, and hikes led by the Palouse Falls chapter of the Ice Age floods are a great way to see the backcountry of this rugged land with such a rich heritage. Careful observers can find signs of the past in this rugged land. Indian trails from the village of Palouse across the Scablands heading for higher country to the north and east. Wagon ruts left by Colonel Wright in his 1858 expedition to punish the Palouse, Spokane, and Coeur d'Alene tribes. Bleached bones of hardy locust trees where homesteads once stood. Here you can find the ruts of the Mullen Road, built by the military as a wagon road precursor to transcontinental rail lines that would later parallel much of it, from Walla Walla to Fort Benton, Montana. Gold strikes in the Rockies meant that merchants across half the country competed to serve the miners. Hard to imagine in this now quiet land, but packers leading teams of 30, 40, or more mules each hauled 400 pounds of flour, 8-cask, 28-gallon whiskey kegs, bacon, gumboots, and other supplies, even pool tables and steamboat parts across this land to supply gold miners in British Columbia, Idaho, and Montana. 2 to 5 or more pack trains crossed Lyons Ferry at the mouth of the Palouse every day during the height of the gold rush boom. When the wind whistles through the bunch grass and June grass, it's interesting to think of the sounds of those days. As an early observer put it, it was quite an imposing sight when the Mulara, the bell mare which led the train, started on the trail followed by the Kabbalah outfit of 30 to 100 loaded pack animals, with the arrieros, the packers, riding alongside, watching for shifted or unbalanced packs. When all the packs were satisfactorily adjusted, the arrieros would break out in song, the music blending with the rattle of the bell of the old Mulara. Each man had his own way of working with his animals. Whispering Thompson, one of the freighters, had 5 span of workhorses and could be heard from a mile away shouting at them. Road builder John Mullen advised to govern mules as you would a woman, with kindness, affection, and caresses, and you will be repaid by their docility and easy management. Out in the remote coulees with the nearest people miles away, I listened for the rattling bell, the songs, and the occasional shouts, but all is still save for the screeching of a hawk or the call of a coyote. My cousin Bill, longtime manager of our ranch, once told me that pioneers had 3 traits that helped them succeed: dyed-in-the-wool optimism, a wry, self-deprecating sense of humor that helped them through the tough times, and a tenacity verging on stubbornness. Traits that he went on to say were useful then, are useful now, and will be useful in the future. Scotch, French, German, those who started with sheep started with nothing but their labor, exchanging it for a share of lambs to be born in the future. Easily herded, an advantage in a rugged land, sheep were also vulnerable to predators, poison weeds, and cold weather right after being shorn. Emil Moreau, for more than half a century a sheep foreman, remembered a sheep shearing rain.
Them
Them damn sheep was like a bunch of ducks. East cold wind, raining. I took 'em around an old house and a big barn. Goddamn sheep got in the barn and the cellar and every place. We had a hell of a time all night holding them under the bluffs. I wish I never saw another sheep that day. Hundreds of thousands of sheep wintered in the Ice Age flood channels of western Whitman and adjacent counties. We're renovating a large sheep camp west of La Crosse, one of the few remaining, with help from the Washington Heritage Barn Program. Filled with memories of shearers who could clip 200 head a day with seldom a neck, of 16 Basque herders from 3 little towns in the Pyrenees, of herders' wagons, and of sheep shearers' graffiti nearly a century old. Remarkable people and a remarkable land. They endured severe privation in the hard times, telling the story of a sheepman who sent his wool to Boston. When it arrived, it wasn't worth enough to pay the freight. His broker in Boston wired him and told him he owed $150 to pay the freight. The sheepman wired back and said, "I do not have $150. Am sending more wool." But they persevered, and most of the ranches across the ancient flood channels started with sheep. As veteran sheep foreman Emil Moreau put it about my family's business, it all come out of them damn sheep. They were characters, as with Jock McCrae, more than 60 years with the sheep. Former Supreme Court Justice William O. Douglas remembered a story shared by fellow herder Billy McGuffey about when he and Jock finished a weary job of loading sheep and went dirty and thirsty into a pub in Spokane. As we came out, the Salvation Army lassie with a tambourine walked up to Jock for a donation. "What do you want, lassie?" Jock asked. "Some money for the Lord," she replied. Jock countered, "How old are ye, lassie?" 18 was her answer. Jock said, "Well, I'm 87, and I'll be seeing the Lord lang before ye, and I'll just gie him the penny myself." There was a pause, and then Jock said, "It all goes to show that the Scotchman isn't stingy, he's just cautious." Mixed with stubbornness and wry humor was boundless optimism, captured by federal surveyor Thomas W. Simons. Bunchgrass has become the synonym for things good, strong, rich, and great. The bunchgrass country is the best and finest country on earth. Bunchgrass cattle and horses are the sweetest, fleetest, and strongest in the world. And a bunchgrass man is the most superb being in the universe. Cattleman J.F. Koss's comments, "You can't grow nothing there," prompted pioneer wheat raiser William Snyder to send a sample of the soil to the Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C. for analysis. It turned out, he heard, that the wind-blown glacial soils could make good wheat fields after all. Congress remained dubious, demanding a study of what its members called the rainless regions of Washington and Oregon, anticipating that early reports of big crops of 40 bushels per acre were fraudulent. The USDA scientists who came to inspect for them talked of huge crops without a drop of rain from seed time to harvest, which was a bit of a stretch. Farming required lots of horsepower and mule power, too. With 3 harvest crews working on my family's farm, 315 animals and 110 men and women were needed to cut the crop. Today it takes a crew of 7. Zane Grey, who came to visit a century ago, wrote of the land, "Late in June, the vast northwestern desert of wheat began to take on a tinge of gold, lending an austere beauty to that endless, rolling, smooth world of treeless hills. 1,000 hills lay bare to the sky, and half of every hill was wheat and half was fallow ground. And all of them, with the shallow valleys between, seemed big and strange and isolated. A lonely, hard, heroic country." More than 150 Whitman County farm families have roots dating back a century or more, among them the Gusky family near Union Flat Creek. Della Evans learned from her mother, Lenora Barr Torgeson, about harvest in the cook wagon. "The whistle would blow at 4 a.m., she recalled. The men would thresh for 2 hours and then eat breakfast at 6. At 10, they had 15 minutes for lunch, taken to the fields. Dinner would be at noon, another lunch at 3. Then the men would thresh until 8, have supper, and bed down for the night. Hot work, conditions far from antiseptic, but plenty to eat. My wife's grandpa Art Buell remembered, you'd eat a million hotcakes pretty easy. 10 years ago, a regional newspaper used La Crosse as an example of the inevitable decline of rural towns. A dedicated group of volunteers, La Crosse Community Pride, was formed and everyone pitched in to prove the town could be saved. The Washington Trust for Historic Preservation credited the efforts for creating a strong record of successful community development. When the town's only grocery closed, they reinvented it as an ongoing enterprise and community center. Today it houses a new grocery store, the local library, a community meeting space, and 2 office spaces. When the local bank closed, they bought the building, secured a new tenant to run it, and have found a new tenant for the adjacent cafe. With several successful revitalization projects under its belt, LCP is now devoting their attention to the rock houses and station. Indeed, we are. When we took on the challenge of saving the bank and purchased it from the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, we looked long and hard and found a bank willing to come to town. Sterling Bank was that bank, later Umpqua and now Bank of Eastern Washington. A friend of mine, when told of it, found an article in the Tacoma News Tribune that credited Sterling Bank with opening an office in the largest town south of Benge, north of Hay, east of Hooper, and west of Dusty. All very true, though how many readers in the Puget Sound neighborhood knew that the population of each of those towns was less than 25, I do not know. La Crosse is on the very edge of the Cheney-Palouse tract of scabland, and close enough so that rocks were dropped by the floodwaters, rocks that eventually became the basis for the rock houses built there in the Great Depression. A local La Crosse businessman, Clint Dobson, built 3 bunkhouses, 2 homes, and a service station during the financially strapped years of the Great Depression, between 1934 and 1936, using rock picked from surrounding fields. Dobson and his helpers, none a stonemason by trade, picked, hauled, and piled as best they could. The houses were to serve as rental units for farm workers, the smaller bunkhouses for workers on the 2 Union Pacific branch lines that met in town. Beginning in 2014, Peggy Bryan of the Whitman County Library and La Crosse Community Pride led the way to save the rock buildings.
I thought, since they're made of basalt, they would be really, they would make a nice museum for something for the Ice Age Floods Institute. So I wrote a letter to the family asking if they would be willing to donate it to the La Crosse Community Pride. After a few conversations, that's exactly what happened. They gifted it to the La Crosse Community Pride.
Jeff Johnson, renovation specialist, and La Crosse Community Pride President Jeff Andrus led the way as we demonstrated that the historic rock structures could be saved. There's work to do. The Washington Trust for Historic Preservation listed the rock houses on its 10 most endangered historic sites statewide list. As they put it, in critical danger of collapse if they do not receive repairs to stabilize the stone and structural elements. We're hoping others join us in saving this bit of heritage, so much a part of this special town. Working with architects and interior designers and enthusiastic students from the Rural Community Design Initiative at Washington State University, with lots of local feedback, the community plans a versatile rock station to serve as Regional History and Geology Museum in conjunction with the local Palouse Falls chapter of the Ice Age Floods Institute. To help with a critical shortage of places for visitors to stay, they will also renovate a rock home and a second bunkhouse, leaving another rock home on the to-do list. It is a remarkable land. At night you can hear the lonesome whistle of a freight train miles away, or see the lights of cities far away, such as Spokane, Pullman, Moscow, and Lewiston, all 80 miles or more distant, but visible in a remarkable Craig Goodwin photo. It is a land traversed by the Ice Age Floods National Geographical Trail, a cooperative venture between the National Park Service and local communities, first in the nation. A land described by the Ice Age Floods Institute, with members across the region impacted by the deluge from Montana to the Oregon coast, as nationally important, but also an international phenomenon. Visitors are intrigued by a remarkable geology like no other. The Wall Street Journal sees the wind-blown glacial hills of the Palouse as the Tuscany of America. National Geographic marvels at the giant lava flows of millions of years ago, landscapes deeply incised by the biggest known flood on Earth, including the channels we've discussed, and further west, Dry Falls, once the largest waterfalls in the world. A cataract twice as high as Niagara and 3 times as wide. A stunning 7 miles from side to side, reports the BBC. Condé Nast Traveler showed Palouse Falls as its cover story of favorite waterfalls, 2 others listed on their top 10 nationally. A guide of best desert hikes refers to its size and splendor, making it most scenic and impressive. Thanks to the hard work of grade school students in nearby Washtenaw, the legislature has designated Palouse as the state waterfall. Yes, the Big Falls is a crown jewel, but it's just the tip of the iceberg of things to see and do. Cooley studied by NASA to learn of floods on a giant scale, as once occurred on the planet Mars. Rangeland that looks much like it has for millennia, where trails and the stuff of legends can still be discerned. A land where some of the oldest evidence of human habitation in the Western Hemisphere has been found. Where technology developed by WSU scientists for the Marmastig was later used by Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin to pick rocks on the moon. Where trusty mules once brought home hundreds of thousands of dollars of gold dust in exchange for flour, whiskey, bacon, and whatever else could be strapped to their backs. Where archaeologists searched for bones of ground sloths and dinosaurs, and where the skeleton of a camel 2.5 million years of age was found. A remarkable land where farm and ranch families have deep roots, a passion for wise stewardship, and for providing nutritious food for hungry people around the nation and the globe. During the lifetimes of veteran farmers, we've increased production 250%, reduced waterborne soil erosion 85%, reduced dust 6-fold, and reduced field burning 22-fold. The biggest gains in productivity and stewardship of any generation since crops were first sown 11,000 years ago. It's the last trade in America to be dominated by family enterprise, and we proudly salute our farm and ranch neighbors here in Whitman County and around the globe. Towns like La Crosse have interesting histories. They are vital arteries in the agricultural plenty upon which our state, our nation, and the world depend. As a local friend told a member of La Crosse Community Pride, what we're doing here is making a difference, not just for me, but for future generations of my family. We believe in the towns of the Inland Northwest, celebrate their heritage, but are most enthusiastic about what they will become in the future. La Crosse and its historic basalt houses are important parts of our regional heritage and future. Please help us make that fine future a reality by pitching in and helping with this vital endeavor. Thanks to everyone who contributed to help us tell of remarkable people and a remarkable land. To our major sponsor, the Whitman County Commissioners, and their County Economic Public Facilities Project. Thanks to the Whitman County Library for taking the lead and for the hard work of Kathy Buchholz of their team in the big task of gathering and organizing photographs. And for the matching funds from the McGregor Company. To Christy Kirkpatrick, the enthusiastic and energetic director of the Whitman County Library, always interested in the heritage and future of our towns. To Lloyd Stoss of the Ice Age Floods Institute. And to Peggy Bryan and fellow La Crosse Community Pride members and directors. Most of all, thanks to the remarkable farm and ranch families who inspire us all.
That's why it's always been so fun to work with lacrosse, because they have big goals and big ideas.
I believe I was sitting at my desk and my director came around the corner and said, Alex McGregor and I have this great idea.